I want to break out, batter down the door, go tramping down black heather all day on the windy moor. And at night, in hayloft or under hedge, find a companion suited to my mind. I want to break through, shatter time and space, cut up the void with a knife, pitch the stars from their place, nor shrink back when, lidded with darkness, the eye of reality opens and blinds me, blue as the sky. So that was a poem by Sangharakshita, founder of the Triratna Buddhist order and movement, to which I practice with in Nottingham. A few friends here from Nottingham as well, which is very nice to see. But this poem, I think, was written some point in the late 70s when he was first establishing the movement here in the UK. But I wasn't able to find the exact time. But the poem speaks for itself, of course, and I think it's fair to say that this poem portrays a very evocative image of the spiritual life, one of desire, of passion, of ecstasy, even eros. Perhaps the image created is even a bit dangerous, a bit hot even, wanting to cut up the void with a knife, very ambitious, even a bit sort of hot-headed maybe, I don't know. But it conjures up a deep desire to break through to Buddhahood. And I love this poem. I love this poem more and more. My love for the poem only grows the more I hear it. The more I hear it on retreat, the more I hear it through friends, through other people giving talks. The verses stand out, certain lines stand out. I'm sure if any of you are interested in poetry at all, you'll know that poems change with time and depending on your context and how much you've read them and in what context, which mood you're in. And I ultimately feel lit up by these verses. You could say sort of sparked off in some ways. And I wanted to start this short talk with this poem because I think it sets the stage very well for what I want to sort of evoke. But also it really reminds me of what a fully lived Dharma life can be like. It is something which is actually it can be even quite hot, quite passionate, with desire, with ecstasy. I was at Padmaloka recently, retreat centre in Norwich, and Padmavajra, who's been living there for over 30 years, he says, I'm definitely in the Dharma life for ecstasy. And I thought that was really good. I'm definitely in it for ecstasy as well, I think. And of course, it's an image of real inspiration, and it's also very easy to lose our threads of inspiration. The flames of one's spiritual life, of course, usually have very often sometimes a big sense of vision, and it can be very easy to lose the thread of that. Dharma life can be very challenging. Generally, when you're meditating quite a lot, you will find those areas. I have found those areas in my psyche that have not been so easily transformed, not so easily playing ball with my sincere inspirations to develop love and kindness and all that stuff. And it's very easy to find oneself going through the motions, just sort of doing things because they ought to be good for you. Or this meditation and getting up at crack at dawn and all that. So keeping those threads of inspiration, keeping the flame going in one's spiritual practice. I mean, this probably goes for whether you're a Buddhist or not, but like keeping that flame alive. One needs to be quite familiar with sources of inspiration that you can return to. And this poem is one of those sources of inspiration, a reliable source of inspiration that I can go back to in order to sort of reinvigorate my life. It's not to say spiritual life, but I don't really know if there's a difference anymore, but like just to reinvigorate life Um, yeah, so this poem of Sangharakshita is, as I say, is a reliable source of inspiration for me. The vision it presents is one of sort of its potency. And I think what I mean by potency is aliveness of beauty, of that area of Eros, which actually the last talk, I can't remember what their names were, but like they conjured up that very well. And I want to be like that poem. I want to cut up the void with a knife. I want to go down trampling black heather on the windy moor, and finding a companion that's suited to my mind, spiritual friendship, to be in real meaningful communication with another human being who shares my aspirations for growth. And of course, poetry, the arts, whether it's fine art, music, plays a significant part in Triratna's distinct emphasis. In The Religion of Art, a book written by Sangharakshita, he refers to something called the spiritual significance of deep aesthetic experience. So beauty addresses our emotions and has the capacity to very much conjure up a deep experience, whatever that might mean for you. And he also talks in this book about the various degrees of spiritual transformation that's possible within art. And so I won't go into that too much, but I'll just take it at face value that transformation is possible through art. It's possible through poetry. And yet, as I said, one of these distinct emphases is on the arts. And Bhante, well, when I say Bhante, it's a term of reverence that I'll use for Sangharakshita, so I might bounce between those two. So when I say Bhante, I mean Sangharakshita. Sangharakshita had references quite often, poets like Shelley, William Blake, Coleridge, and Wordsworth. And in Sangharakshita's memoirs, fourth volume of his memoirs, he goes to see, when he's just come back to the UK after having a long period of time in India, he goes to Wagner's goes to see the Ring Cycle. I've never actually seen the Ring Cycle, so I don't know what it is, but it seems to be something. I don't know if anyone else knows what the Ring Cycle is, but it seems to be something that very, very much touched him, because he's described getting on the bus after, and he's with a friend that has invited him along to this, and he's so moved by the experience, he's in complete silence for the entire journey home. And his friend's really puzzled because she thinks, oh my gosh, he's not liked it. Sangharakshita seems to have been quite a unique character, and she was really worried that he'd offended him or something, or she'd offended him. But actually, he was so deeply moved, he was unable to talk. He describes for days, actually, being in a state of bliss, of sheer inspiration, and not being able to put that into words. So that's a fantastic example of art expanding consciousness, and art producing a change of life indirectly by appealing to our sense of beauty. And since we possess an emotional as well as an intellectual and a volitional nature, we're capable of responding to beauty no less than we are to truth and goodness. That last little bit, again, was a quote from The Religion of Art. And when I first came along to the Buddhist Center, having not long graduated from art school myself, I was very pleased to see this distinct emphasis on the arts. I thought, oh, this could be my little way in. But what if you aren't particularly turned on by the Romantics, or not really turned on by classical music? What if you don't actually know what the Wagner's ring cycle is? So I'm screwed. What actually you really loved was punk music, metal, industrial noise music. I don't know if any of these things are appealing to any of you. But I remember the first time I made a strong aesthetic connection with, well, probably anything really. I was around 12 years old. I remember watching music videos on, I don't know if it's still a thing, but on Kerrang, on telly. And I would, in one of those little sessions, I remember coming across a music video by a band called System of a Down. And well, the music was wild. It was very weird. The image of these guys, like one of them was just sort of shirtless with these, and he had a plaited beard or something, and they seemed to be sort of so alive and animated, and as though they were sort of trying to break through the very form that sort of they inhabited or something. Again, that kind of breaking through imagery. And I was sort of possessed, really. I was entranced. I thought, oh my goodness, look at that! Like, that is amazing. I want to be like them, you know. And prior to that, I just thought music was like Spice Girls and stuff like that. I didn't really know anyone else was doing music. So it was just one of those moments where I was just like, oh my gosh, that's just like a real significant moment. Yeah, and that experience has never really left me. 5 years of Dharma practice seems to have only strengthened my love for extreme music, as one might call it. Only recently I went to see an American black metal band called Liturgy. I don't know if anyone else has seen them before, but black metal is a kind of metal genre which is very fast. It's not actually particularly technical, it's just very fast. And Liturgy are particularly fast, faster than most. And again, it was that kind of experience where it was as if the music was bursting at the seams of what was possible. It's like it couldn't go any faster. The band are sort of like this because they're just start playing the instruments so fast they can't really move, because otherwise they'll just mess up and they'll just fall out of time or something. And again, just being like, there is something ecstatic about this, and just being like, God, my heart longs to be like this music, just to be in a state of kind of movement, of ecstasy again. Not unlike the sort of Dharma practice that Sangharakshita is conjuring up in that poem. I want to break through. So when I first came along, I wasn't sort of remotely interested in the peaceful-looking Buddha. I was going to say Buddha then. Buddha that sat serenely under the tree. I kept thinking to myself, why does everyone want to be like that? Like, why does everyone want to sort of be sat sort of still by a tree? I couldn't really get my head around it. Like, sort of like I was like, I want to be on fire. Like, I want to be like, I want to run around. I want to be in that kind of state of ecstasy, that sort of Liturgy we're conjuring up. And of course, I'm aware that this comes with a whole sort of cacophony of ideas and views that I had about this image, which soon was sort of shattered, thank goodness. And a lot of them were sort of completely false. And it only sort of took me to sort of see the image of Padmasambhava to realize that I was like, oh, okay, so he's, so it can look like that, and that's pretty cool. But in the background, to sort of cut a long story short in some ways, in the background of my psyche, I definitely sort of struggled to reconcile how these two loves. So I felt quite deeply in love with the Dharma. It did very much feel like coming home, as a lot of people often describe. And I felt an instant faith connection to the truth of the Dharma, to the truth of love, of metta, of interconnectedness, and just the wisdom that the people in the Sangha seemed to be embodying. And they weren't flashy either. They were just quite normal. And I then happened to meet a man called Paraga, an order member called Paraga, who has since become a very good friend of mine. And like myself, he also studied art for many years and was in heavy metal bands, including a very successful heavy metal band. And I distinctly remember seeing him and him embodying this kind of energy, this real energy, but also he was very grounded. Like, I'd been involved in the art scene and like the punk and hardcore scene in Bristol where I grew up, and people were quite flighty and they didn't necessarily have a lot of integrity. But Paragus certainly had integrity. He was solid, a very solid man. And it was one of those moments where you just sort of realize, I can do this actually. I can sort of see a bit of myself in him and his qualities of which I want to sort of possess. And the reason I sort of wanted just to sort of create that little image with the poem and some of those experiences with music was towards the end of last year, I attended a young Buddhist retreat at Adhisthana, a retreat centered in Ledbury, isn't it? And I was on the team helping to facilitate this weekend, and I gave a talk not dissimilar to this, but a bit more personal. And I spoke about my journey, and I spoke about being into the things that I was into. And I was facilitating a group, and in that group, the group was. I don't know if any of them were in that group. The group was quite mellow. It wasn't uninteresting, but people were just quite sort of quiet in a way. And but then someone sort of and I really appreciate this actually. This one young woman, she went round and she said, I'm really into grime music and anything auto-tuned. And I thought, okay. But she said, I sometimes find that hard to reconcile that with my Dharma practice, this thing over here that's supposed to be really good for me, and then there's this thing over here that I actually like. And like, I sort of know that that's good for me, and like, but then I'm actually lit up by this stuff. So, and it was very interesting because then what happened is everyone sort of went round in the group and sort of confessionally said what they were actually into. And you could feel the room tangibly change. People were animated. People were sort of like, oh God, yeah, I love that film or that scene or something like that in this particular film or something like that. And I was just really grateful for that young woman to just sort of saying that. And it was at that moment being like, wow, like we really shouldn't cut off from these things that, however sort of unrefined or so-called dodgy they are or something like that, or, or even sort of violent or something, some of this imagery that really seems to sort of get us going in some ways. We really ought not to cut ourselves off for that because it doesn't fit this image of what a practicing Buddhist should look like. And in my experience, if one tried to cut off those parts of ourselves, particularly if you really love them, if you've had a very strong connection, actually they'll just re-emerge and strike down any efforts you make to grow anyway. So it's just, can't really cut it off anyway. So, yeah, in other words, we need to make contact with where our energy is and what moves us, because what we are moved by, deeply moved by, however so-called unrefined a source that may be, that's where the energy is. And if we are in touch with that energy, we can do something. And through integration, we really need to get to know those things that move us, however weird and messed up, as I said, but like really get to know them. Like, what happens to you when you're at like a rave or you're at like a gig or something? What happens to your body? Like, for me, when I saw that liturgy band, like, I felt like I felt ecstatic, blissful, like I could be creative, And I'm not trying to say that music is dharmic. I don't think that's the case. But I think what happens in my experience, and I've talked a lot about this with Paraga, is that feeling that happens when you're in those situations will characterize how you engage with the Dharma and how you'll find ways into the Dharma. Yeah, so whether that's grime music or whatever. And it's not conceptual, it's felt. It's like, because in that moment, that you're in some kind of state of freedom, you're getting a sense of it. And that to me, to find that then, okay, so where is that present in one's Dharma life? Where is that present in one's spiritual life? Where is that sense of ecstasy, energy, potency in one's Dharma life? Because if it's not there, it just seems not really worth it, to be honest, because it just seems a load of hard work. So I'll wrap up in the next few minutes. So yeah, this seems to me to be the real alchemy of the spiritual life, and I don't actually have the answers, so I'm sort of right in the throes of it myself, and often find, sometimes, again, good for me over here, what I actually like over here, and somehow managing to find some middle. But man, if they meet, if they get close, it's just it's good, it's real good. Yeah, so it's that kind of finding emotional equivalence for our intellectual understanding in the same sort of territory, that famous Bhante aphorism. So for me, I found a bit of a bridge between those two worlds with Bhante's writing, particularly in Tantric Buddhism. I think extreme music, at its best of all genres, as I've mentioned, functions a bit like the sort of wrathful deities we find in the Vajrayana. They are fierce, naked, completely without restraint. And it seems to me that we need a bit of that energy. I need to bring that energy more towards the things that are good for me. And if we're going to have any hope of gaining insight, of breaking into Buddhahood, as the poem mentions, so I'll just end with a quote from one of these books, or one of these sets of writings by Bhante, from the symbolism of the cremation ground and the celestial maidens, which is, if that's not already enough of a title to make you want to listen to it, I don't know what else is. So I'll just end with this quote. There is a powerful, almost volcanic upsurge of energy which bursts through the previous psychological conditionings, which bursts through the various cycles of self-created, self-induced problems, and leaves them all there, hanging like a garland of skulls, dead. Thank you.